because of that, we're in a thankful mood. So here's the difficult part. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. All three of us didn't really like this movie. If you're here for people that did like this movie, I don't know where you're going to find that, but keep searching. But to start things off, maybe stick around for this part. Let's be thankful for this movie. What's a good thing you can say about Hillbilly Elegy? Todd, you're up first.
Oh, goodness. All right, the best part of the movie, in my opinion, is Glenn Close. The makeup they put on her, and she's just pretty good in it. So I think probably her. She reminds me of a hillbilly grandma, and I grew up in rural areas in the South growing up. So I've met a few, and so yeah, I'm gonna say Glenn Close.
Yeah, no. So that when I was checking out your review, I was like, I'm pretty sure me and Todd have a similar one. So I'll probably go a different way. But Glenn Close is terrific in this movie, and I'll get into some of the other performances that are not good at all. Which is really like, I don't think I've ever seen a difference quite like this before, where everyone is like at Lifetime movie level acting, and then she's still like, oh well, I'm an Oscar caliber actor, so I'm not, gonna let this terrible script weigh me down. I guess the one that I want to throw out as like a thankfulness of is the premise of this movie, because I think if you were given like the one sentence pitch, this does make sense. Like someone who grew up in like the more rural area of the South and is very much like now a part of like city life in a fancy college. Like that does seem intriguing on paper. Now the execution of said premise is botched completely, but I still think like someone watching this, I think a lot of screenwriters that maybe had an upbringing like that, because Todd, I wasn't like growing up like in these types of parts, but I was often like in like parts of the South all the time. And it is one of those unfortunate things, especially like when you grow up with a little bit in your background where it's like, oh, they completely like ruined this. I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, well, like I can draw from like my real life story and do something really good with that premise. But Lindsay, what is your positive here?
One positive thing about this movie? I liked the dog. I thought the dog was really cute.
The dog was very good.
That was a highlight for me.
So with that out of the way, this movie it's a wet turd, and it might be Todd. This is where I wanted to see what your review was, because this might be in contention for one of the worst movies of the year for me.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. Especially, okay, look, I talked about this in the film club chat we're in. I really enjoyed Gabriel Basso in The Kings of Summer. I think all three actors are really solid in there. I don't remember him in Super 8, but like if you were told, hey, you're going to lead a movie with Amy Adams and Glenn Close, if I was told that, I'd be ecstatic. Like, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm for sure like I'm going to be working for the rest of my career because of this. And like, he's bad in it, but I don't think that's on him necessarily, because this script is atrocious. And I've heard from some people that like the source material is like not great either in a couple ways. And I don't know did either of you read this by chance?
I haven't, but I've read about it.
Yeah, gotcha. Because here's the thing that I was going to throw out as this is the reason that I think it's in contention for the worst of the year. I think this movie surprisingly does something that I don't think I've ever seen a movie do. Amy Adams is bad in this movie. And I don't know if like everybody's ready for that conversation, but like she's not good. Like it's sad.
Yeah, I've really never seen a performance like this from her where it's just like boring and overacted, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, she's always so strong that it had to have been like the script that messed her up.
Well, there's one scene in particular, because at first I was like, okay, well maybe the words are bad and like Amy Adams, she's giving an okay performance, but I agree with you. Like it's not just the fact like it's a little bit overreacting. I think it's that juxtaposed with a boring script. Like the dialogue she is saying does not match what Amy Adams is doing like physically as an actor.
Yeah.
And there was one scene in particular in a hospital with Gabrielle Basso, Amy Adams, and I'm trying to remember the girl that was in Swallow. Is that Haley Bennett? Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah. It's those three, and the thing is, all three of those actors, again, Haley Bennett, from what I've seen of her so far, she's been solid in everything. And all three of them are just like, I thought I was watching like movie 43 or something, like level of like, this is stinky. Like all three of them are bad in the scene. What was Ron Howard thinking? Because I know some people were like making fun of Ron Howard after this movie, and Lindsay and Todd, I don't know where exactly you guys land on this. I like Ron Howard. I found Rush to be really really endearing with like the struggles of passions. I like Cinderella Man. I like A Beautiful Mind. Even Solo, if you want to count that as a semi Ron Howard film. The Grinch Stole Christmas. Like he's taken weird chances. So I understand, like, I don't know. I feel like it's easy to dunk on Ron Howard, but like, I don't know if this is necessarily his fault.
I disagree.
Look at his movies.
I'm gonna. It is easy to dunk on him because he deserves it, in my opinion. I just think.
Oh, yeah. I just looked up what movies he's done, and there's not one on here that I've enjoyed.
I think the problem with Ron Howard. I did like Solo. I think the problem with Ron Howard, it's not that I dislike any of his films. I would disagree that he really takes that serious of chances. Like his films always seem very safe. Just standard safe direction. Like there are, I mean, this is a really weird one to think about, but imagine what someone like Terrence Malick, if you've ever seen one of his films, would do with something like Hillbilly Elegy. Just to give you some extreme example of, you know, like some auteur who would do something weird. But when you look at this, it's just like, yeah, he just kind of shoots dialogue in static, flat ways for me. And that was part of what I honestly disliked about this film was, in addition to it being kind of boring and like there are weird ways that it contextualized things that I had problems with, but like in addition to that, I just kind of felt like, and nothing exciting happened in the direction at all. Like there was nothing cool or interesting. Yeah,
agree with that. I think the thing that, because I think we are sort of in agreement, because I guess I semi misspoke, because I meant like he sort of takes risks in what he decides to do a project on. I mean, he went from The Grinch Who Stole Christmas to A Beautiful Mind, and that's Jim Carrey's Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and that movie is bizarre, but I love it. And I mean, he did Solo, which is a fine movie, and then Hillbilly Elegy, which is a terrible movie. So he really, you know, allows himself to do whatever he wants. But no, I get what you're saying, Todd. He really doesn't move the needle in any way. I'm trying to think of any other actually, Lindsay, I don't know if you're familiar with this person's work, but do you remember the director that did Jeff Nichols? He did Mud. He did Take Shelter, Midnight Special, and that movie Loving that was supposed to be like an Oscar-y movie but never really quite took off.
Oh, I don't think I've ever actually seen any of those that you just listed.
Oh, really? Okay. I really like Nichols because I feel like he portrays the South in the most accurate way that I've seen so far, and that's mostly Mud. I mean, Take Shelter, even though it is set in a southern area, it could be the actual story could be really anywhere. It's just those two actors have southern accents, but Mud is like really indicative to what like life in the South is similar to like something like Peanut Butter Falcon. I think both those movies are not necessarily like, yeah, the South is like terrible and there's only like 4-toothed hillbillies doing heroin or whatever, and it's like, guys, you can like we can let one of these movies come out every 5 years, but like when that's the only stories that like people are pushing for Best Picture, it's like, come on now.
Well, that's part of what's weird about its presentation of the South is there like all these kind of random parts where, you know, like there's the part where everyone's saluting, you know, when the hearse is going by, and she's like, because we're hill people, we respect. Like there's these weird little parts where it's like, remember, these are Southerners. You were talking about Southerners, but for the most part, like people talk about this, you know, being some humanizing story about like the rural South when like it really cherry picks the worst aspects. Like it just makes the South look like everyone, like you were talking about before, like everyone's a drug addict and everyone's like you know what I mean, like squatting in homes and, you know, like barely getting by. I don't know. I mean, yes, barely getting by, but like I don't know. It was an interesting presentation of it that didn't seem as flattering as some people seem to think it is. And speaking from the book kind of is more of a love letter to these people. Like I think the book's problematic in some of the ways that we don't have to discuss on here, but it's at least kind of an interesting read, if that makes sense. It's engaging, it challenges you a little bit, where this film was just kind of like, I don't know, like Southern rural poverty porn, or, you know, like almost,
sure. And I actually really like what you were saying, because that's great to hear that somehow they just sort of botched this. Because I was thinking in the movie when I think, man, this is okay. One of the things, so is the book presented in a similar way, chronologically as the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, from what I remember, yeah.
Okay, because the only reason I was asking is like some of the things one of the things in particular, I think they could have. I think if you move certain pieces, like it doesn't make sense the way like certain moments are presented where they are. Like I think there's a key like crisis scene with Amy Adams that doesn't fit like the narrative through line on the other side as well as it should. But the thing I was going to ask you is because there's a sense of like at the end it feels cheap because it's supposed to get this character JD. It's supposed to make it feel like, oh well, he still loves his humble beginnings or whatever, and he's driving home to get the job, and it's supposed to be like a film like Lady Bird, which I think is perfect at doing that. Of you grew up in the suburbs and you kind of hate that, you kind of want to be in a big city, and then you get to the big city and you realize, oh well, I really just want to be with my mom, and like I miss certain things about Sacramento, and I really took it for granted. I don't get that from Hillbilly Elegy, and that it's even worse to hear that that's present in the book. It just doesn't. It's just not put on display here, or like it's almost like they're like, oh well, we know the ending, so like we'll just do that anyway. No worries. Like we don't have to put in the work.
Yeah, the ending felt more earned in the book. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
That's really. Have you seen Jeff Nichols by chance, Todd?
Yes, and I generally agree with your sentiment that he presents the South in a more accurate way.
Yeah, because I would have liked to see him get his hands on something like this, and I don't know, maybe there could have been something there. I actually was reading there was an article because I thought it was talking about I forget the title of it and where it was on, and now I feel bad not crediting the author. But it was titled like we need more like different portrayals of the South, not just like cherry pick stuff. And the thumbnail was like Hillbilly Elegy. So I wasn't sure if that was like a positive or like if they didn't like it or they did like it and were like, we need more movies like this. And I was like, oh, if that's the case, like this New York writer, I'm about to have a couple mean comments. The thing they were talking about is the they were like, I don't really like this movie, but I think it does have moments, and I do actually kind of agree with that. And I think that's why it's a little bit more infuriating than a movie like, say, The Wrong Missy, which I despise all the way through. But
sure.
They were talking about how there's this scene with Glenn Close where there's someone from Meals on Wheels who comes by.
Yes.
And she's already embarrassed because it's Meals on Wheels, and there's not necessarily that's not something you should be embarrassed about, but it's something that because she's very prideful, and again, I feel like the only character that they sort of gave an actual personality was Glenn Close, but that might just be her tremendous acting.
She's that good.
Yeah. But she gets the food and she's realized she's like, oh, but I ordered 2 meals, and the guy's like, oh, well, kind of tough luck, and she's like, please, I'm doing the best I can, all this stuff, and he just sort of scrunches around in the bottom to give her just goes out of his way to help her out, and that's one of the things that I think, Todd, you were bringing up, it sort of cherry picks when to be here's a good thing about the South, and then it's here's 5 other bad things about the South. when you do this over and over, there's not going to be a sense of yeah, he still loves his home at the end of the movie, because for all intents and purposes, he hasn't shown. There aren't moments there's a barbecue scene that should be a set piece, and they really talk about nothing. I feel maybe it's more fleshed out in the book, but I feel they had notes of what was going to happen in that scene, and they were like, oh, don't worry, we're sort of going to improv this a little bit more, but here's the main points. But it felt like they were just reading bullet points, and they said something oh, how'd you get your wife? Did you blind her? And he's like, yep, I did that. And I was like, guys, write better dialogue.
Literally.
So,
but yeah, no, I totally agree. There's no payoff at the end that would make you ever think that he even likes being there, because they only show you him hating everything and it being awful. They never show any kind of love for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was honestly really kind of excited to watch this movie to hate it because of what I've heard about the book. So I was like, oh, cool, we're going to watch this and hate on it. But then it was so boring and apolitical that we couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is such a waste of time.
Yeah. That's almost the worst part about it is there's not even necessarily things like when I saw The Wrong Missy, it's there's 5 things I can tell someone that hey, can you believe this movie does this? There's one thing I will throw out. There's some of the worst acting I've seen from extras. Or not extras, but random people. There's a guy who's a electronics employee, and I don't know how they gave him this line reading, and they were like, "Yep, that's good." But look, if you're at this point and you're like, "Oh, don't spoil the movie," yeah, just get out of here, I guess. But I'm sure at this point you don't care. He's the little kid steals a calculator and he goes, "Hey, hey, stop!" He just flips it to 20, and it's dude, dial it back a little bit. The kid stole a calculator, and he grabbed it from it, and he's I forget what he says, but it's something to the effect of "Why would you think of doing this, you mongrel?" And it's guys, who wrote this? And it's the person who wrote The Shape of Water, and The Shape of Water is a well-written movie. So
well, it's also a well-directed movie.
It is. You got me there.
Yeah. Well, because I think that's some of the problem is I don't know. Well, for one, I just wanted to double back just for a second. That scene where Glenn Close is talking to the Meals on Wheels guy is the only point in the movie that I felt anything at all.
Same.
And it was it's a powerful moment. And that's the real problem with this film. I don't necessarily mean to present myself as I liked the book as much as the book made me feel things. It's provocative. It attempts to make an argument that I generally disagree with, but it attempts to make it. You can kind of engage with it. Where with this film, it just kind of felt just a bunch of scenes cut together that it just felt so ordinary. There just wasn't anything that really gave me some sort of like provocative feeling or interesting feeling. And that's really the key to this movie. Is it's not that there's a ton of like super offensive, horrible stuff in it. It's just that kind of boring and like not that well made. And it's
yeah, definitely. I will say, because you said that was the only scene that made you feel something, and maybe this is because I knew how many people like disliked and really hated this movie, like going into it. The opening scene, I think I will say, like, it reminds me of like places I've camped, like people, because like there was something when I was a kid, my grandfather would, and I, again, just to reiterate, I'm not like an actual hillbilly. Not that it matters. Like, I wouldn't care if I was, but like, I'm just making sure when people are like, "Oh, you can't claim us," I'm like, "Nope, not trying to." Just because if anyway, it doesn't matter. We go to this like all boys like camping ground, and it would just be like dudes wrestling in the lake, a poorly tied rope on a tree that you'd swing into the Brazos River on, and just stupid stuff like that. And there's like I have good stories like that. Like my dad, there was this part that was more shallow, and the kids would ride on the rocks, and then the dads would grab them later on, so that way they wouldn't get pulled in with the current, because most of us couldn't swim that well. And my dad accidentally didn't grab me, so I went further, and I busted my knee like wide open on this like huge rock. And there was a guy who got me later down the river with his fishing pole. So like similar things like that. Like these are things where I'm like, I have like memories of like places like this. So being shown that, and then immediately followed, I said in my head, I was like, oh, the kid's about to be like waterboarded, I bet. And then he was, and I was like, oh, good. Like this is gonna be like, oh, it's a dangerous world here in the South. So that I completely agree with your sentiments, Todd, where it's like, hey, like if you want this moment at the end to mean something, like you can't do a 1 to 5. And I do think it's interesting that at least the book semi presents like at the end, like, hey, reflecting on this, like I wouldn't want it any other way, I guess. Here's one I was gonna throw out to y'all as well. And this is probably the last thing that'll talk about this movie. I actually didn't mind Frida Pinto as Usha. I thought she was solid, and she's been in other things I've seen, Slumdog Millionaire. I thought she was kind of fine in Immortals, which is a forgettable movie, but and then she's also in Planet of the Apes and Knights of Cups. But I will say, they kind of completely waste the character, and I don't know if it's like this in the book, then they're sort of drawing from that, I guess. But like, there's like a good hour of the movie where she's not in it, and then at the end, it's supposed to be like, oh, hey, this character exists again, and I was like, oh yeah, like where has she been? Like, and I thought I would have liked like something sprinkled in with the two of them. Because I do like her, like being like, oh hey, like the even the fork thing. I was like, that's kind of ridiculous, but like at least she is giving, like she's being comedic, she's being endearing. There's emotion there, I guess. Because one of the other scenes, I say a positive and then I immediately remember a negative. Is and to be fair, maybe this actually happened, sure. But the way they film, like the dinner sequence in full, ridiculous, and just the bigger thing where he's like, yeah, I grew up in the South, and then someone's like, oh, bunch of dirty hillbillies, huh? And I'm like, God.
Rednecks.
Oh my God, the rednecks line?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Thank you, Todd. Sorry. Yeah.
Like, how dare you use that word?
Yeah, he says, how dare you use the rednecks word? And I thought at that point, I was like, I'm watching a parody film. That's what's got to be happening here. Like,
That was
See,
so
that's-
ridiculous.
That to me is, not to keep harping on it though, that is the sort of scene that I blame Ron Howard for, because it's I really do though, not to keep harping on it, but like
no,
I just think it just comes off as so kind of like hokey, and like you gotta get in there and like figure out how to make that scene work better, because it really does come off almost like a parody. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
like
it feels like an
so
SNL
close.
skit of like, oh, here's the poor kid who grew up in the South sketch we came up with, like making fun of a Hillbilly Elegy Oscar movie.
Yes.
Gosh, I just can't believe they pulled the "that's our word" type of nonsense with redneck.
Literally.
Well, okay, and this is not to go off here, but this is what annoys me about this movie is they don't add context to anything. Like in reality, there is some basis for finding the term redneck offensive, in that its origins are labor movements. A lot of people don't know that, but like, they would wear the red scarves to do that, and so redneck was this term that kind of originated as this like borderline ethnic slur, and like there's all the social history to why you could at least try to argue that. But one, you don't treat it like it's saying the N-word, because it's just not, and that's how the movie does it. But like two, you don't you don't just throw that in there and then not have any context for people understanding it. Like that scene is so bad.
Yeah. And I think I forget which one it was, but there was a similar thing. I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was some like it was something that like is more in the vernacular now, but it does have a history of like being a slur. I forget if it's Irish or Scottish people, and people don't necessarily know the history of it. And someone was arguing, and here's to your point, they were like, oh, well, that word, and they said the word, and they were like, is basically the same as the N-word. And to quote John Mulaney, if you're saying one of the words, then it is not as bad as the other word you're not saying. Like,
Exactly. Yes.
Oh man. So that's pretty much it with Hillbilly Elegy. I don't know if you guys have. Do you guys have anything else